Good afternoon. My name is Christine M Condo, and I am an autism writer and neurodiversity advocate based in the USA. First, I would like to thank Dr. Ruggieri for inviting me to speak to you today. I am humbled and honored to be asked to share my personal experience being autistic and contribute to this important conference. I am a writer and an advocate, but most important, I am autistic. This is important because I'm not what most people think of when they hear autistic. Instead, they think of a male, white teenager or young adult who speaks in strange monotones, if he even speaks at all. They think of someone who can't look them in the eye and can't relate to them socially or emotionally. They think of someone who, when upset, howls and grunts and hits himself repeatedly and physically attacks anyone who comes near him. And often, they think of someone with an extraordinary, even superhuman gift or talent, like having an eidetic memory or being a musical prodigy. In short, the autistic stereotype is an inhuman creature, dangerous and unpredictable, strangely gifted, and lacking essential human qualities. It is a soulless automaton, a genius robot shaped like a human being. As an autistic woman, I must stress that this stereotype, this virtually universal conception of autism, does not exist. That is so important, I will repeat it. That stereotype of the autistic is not real. You'll never meet an autistic person like that. But if that is the case, how did this stereotype come to be? How could something like autism be so completely misunderstood for so many years? As many of you know, the history of autism as we know it begins in the 1930s and 40s. Two researchers, Leo Kanner and Hans Asperger, both used the term autism, derived from the Greek word autos, which means self, to describe a subset of male children that lacked interest in those around them, even parents and siblings. Kanner's group was nonverbal and developmentally delayed, while Asperger's group was verbal and of normal intelligence. But in all other respects, the children were the same, seemingly emotionally limited, uninterested in forming and maintaining attachments with other children. This phenomenon fascinated researchers, and by the 80s and 90s, experts set out to define what became termed an autism spectrum disorder. But by only conducting narrow studies in unrealistic settings on very young male children, they failed to gain an understanding of the actual lived experience of being autistic. Instead, they determined that the autistic child's mind was unknown and unknowable, a tragic figure forever barred from normal human thoughts, feelings, and relationships. They asserted that these children had no capacity for empathy, thereby lacking an essential human quality that made them inhuman. In the 1990s, popular media latched on to this inhuman human. The stereotype became a permanent fixture in our social consciousness through Dustin Hoffman's Oscar-winning performance in the highly successful movie Rain Man. And Rain Man did autistics an additional disservice by implying that all autistics were savants. This robotic savant stereotype has persisted decade after decade, even to this day, as seen in American TV shows like The Good Doctor and movies like Music. Unfortunately, with few exceptions, real autism does not exist in popular culture or in our social understanding of what autism is. Real autistics are not hand-flapping zombie geniuses. Savants are no more common in autism than in the general population. We, real autistics, do not think of ourselves as having a disorder. Real autism is not an affliction, a set of deficits, or a condition to be suppressed or eradicated. Instead, we think of ourselves as neurologically different, as neurodivergent or neurodiverse. And this includes autistics with mutism, or an inability to speak, and those with apraxia, an inability to maintain motor control. As strange as these individuals may seem on the outside, they have the same rich, emotional, and thoughtful inner lives as other autistics and non-autistic people. Most important, real autistics are thinking, feeling, fully realized humans, inside and out. On the outside, we look the same as everyone else. But on the inside, the way our brains take in and process information is fundamentally different from that of non-autistic people. Fully understanding this is a two-step process. First, we have to remove the primary barrier to conceptualizing this difference. That barrier is that many people do not realize there is any other way of thinking, feeling, and experiencing the world other than their own, as confirmed by their interactions with those around them. Most people believe that their own thought processes and social behaviors are innate. They assume that they were born with them, and that everyone is born with the same ones. But there is no single inherent way of thinking, acting, and being. We learn these behaviors from those around us. Now, we learn them at such a young age that we forget we didn't always know them. But in fact, thought and social behavioral patterns vary greatly across different cultures, and even across different social groups within a culture. So we must start with an acceptance of the idea that there is no single inherently human way to think, feel, and act. Once we understand that our ways of interacting with the world are learned and not inborn, then we can take the next step to understanding the difference between autistic and non-autistic people. Unlike the nuanced lives of non-autistics, the lived experience of autism is one defined by extremes, including strong, sometimes overwhelming emotions and sensory sensitivities that often contribute to intermittent loss of speech and motor control, even among supposedly high-functioning autistics. We also tend towards deep and abiding interests, vivid imaginations, and unfiltered speech and actions. We do not learn the nuances of social expression and expectations as children the way non-autistics do. While exact reasons for this are still unclear, it may be because autistics do not prioritize and categorize incoming information. While non-autistic people naturally select and focus on important things they see and hear and ignore the rest, autistic people do not. To us, all information and stimuli come in at the same intensity. We struggle to pick out what is important based on our experience alone. We rely heavily on textual information because it lacks ambiguity, both in speech and writing. Social rules and subtextual information do not come to the foreground. There's too much else coming in. We have to consciously figure out these rules and customs for ourselves through extensive trial and error. And then we have to learn to perform them in an environment that is so overstimulating, we have to constantly suppress the impulse to react inappropriately or escape entirely. So what does this look like? Well, for most autistics, it looks like this. I, the person you are watching now, am expending constant mental effort to look, speak, and act like a non-autistic person. This is a performance. None of what you see comes naturally to me. I had to learn it over the course of many years, and it takes so much cognitive energy that I can only expend this effort for a few hours a day, at the most. When I do not have enough energy to keep this performance up, my autism shows through. But my autistic self is not the hand-flapping, self-harming stereotype that people expect. What happens instead is that all of the friendliness and emotion that I force into my tone of voice, facial expressions, and body language disappears. When I cannot maintain my performance, I drop back into my natural way of speaking and acting. But what sounds simple and unforced to me is misinterpreted by others as mean, rude, defensive, and arrogant. People do not want to work with me or be friends with me. Peers complain about my harsh tone of voice and bad attitude. And inevitably, someone will take something innocuous that I said so personally that they will never speak to me again, without me knowing what it was or when it occurred. And usually, even though I beg them to, they won't even tell me what I did to upset them, saying they cannot believe I didn't already know. And this has happened to me so many times, I have lost count. And my experience is not unique. I hear these same stories from other autistics of all ages, from every part of the world. I hear their frustration and their anger. I hear their sadness and their hopelessness. Autistics like me are frequently misunderstood, disbelieved, bullied, and ostracized. And so those of us who can keep our true selves hidden from those around us. People who validate our fake selves with the same intensity as they would recoil from our real ones. We live in a world where we cannot, dare not, act naturally. Because if we do, we will be excluded from society, unable to work, unable to make friends, always misunderstood, and always alone. The autistic experience of loneliness is deep and deeply painful. Even when we are with friends, we are keenly aware that they do not know who we really are. Our fake selves relate to them, and they to our fake selves, but our real ones remain isolated and unacknowledged. We live in a world that doesn't just not accept us, it doesn't even realize we exist. That is real autism. And real autism is not real for the majority of the people we interact with. As a society, we must overcome multiple obstacles before real autism can be seen and known. First, non-autistic people must realize that the way they think, feel, and act is not universal. They must become open to the idea that many different ways of thinking and being in the world can and do exist. Only then will autistic differences be seen as differences and not deficits. Only then will we be able to see that these differences are only unacceptable when viewed through the narrow prism of social expectations. Only then will autistics like me finally be able to put down our disguises and interact with others in ways that are honest and meaningful to us. Only then will we be seen and accepted for who we really are. So we need your help in debunking the false autistic stereotype, in re-examining our cultural attachment to a single way of thinking and being, and in understanding that autism specifically and neurodiversity generally are not aberrations from the human experience. They're natural and maybe even essential differences that can broaden our understanding of what it means to be human. I am autistic. I'm not inhuman. I'm just different. I and other autistics across the entire range of the spectrum want to connect. We want to have relationships. We want to be productive members of society, to be friends and have friends, to love and be loved, just like everyone else. Right now, I have to hide my true self to do that. But with your help, someday people like me will not have to hide our true selves to be accepted. So please join me this April, this Autism Acceptance Month, this day, at this very conference, in celebrating neurodiversity, in opening our minds and hearts to different ways of thinking, feeling, and being. Help bring us out from behind our disguises. Help us become loved and accepted for our true selves underneath. I am autistic. I am what real autism is actually like. Thank you.